Hello, welcome to our webinar, The Clerk's Guide to Social Media Records. This is Robert Wilburn from Archive Social. We're presenting this in partnership with Municode. If we can go to the next slide. Great. Okay, so a couple of quick housekeeping details. All attendees are on mute. Feel free to use the question function to submit questions. So if you look on the right where your GoToWebinar control panel is, about halfway down you'll see a tab that's marked questions. And if you just expand that, you can type in questions. You can either send that privately just to the organizers or send it to the group. And we'll do a combination of answering questions as we go along, as well as hitting a number of them at the end of the presentation. So again, feel free to ask the questions as we go along, and we'll answer some of those, but then there'll also be a dedicated time for Q&A throughout the presentation. Finally, the webinar is recorded. We'll send a post-webinar follow-up email 1 to 2 days after this, and we'll also include links to any resources that are mentioned during the webinar. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Eric Grant, President of Municode.
Great. Thanks a lot, Robert. I really appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. For those of you who have not had the great pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Eric Grant, and I'm the president of Municipal Code Corporation, or as we're most commonly known as Municode. And I'd like to start by saying thank you to all of you. I know that your schedules are extremely busy. You're pulled in 100 different directions and have lots of things to do every day. So you taking the time out to be with us today it means a lot to us. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to the third educational workshop that we have put on, and this one is the Clerk's Guide to Social Media Records. And as Robert said, we've got the pleasure today of welcoming Anil Chawla. He's the president and founder of Archive Social, to share his insights on what I think is a really important topic for all of us to get our arms around and to fully understand, so we can take the best care of our citizens possible. As many of you may know, Archive Social is the #1 provider of social media archiving to local entities. Great milestone for them over the last couple of months. They're now serving over 1,000 agencies nationwide, and just a great partner for us. They're our trusted source of information for social media record retention, and we couldn't be more excited for today's educational workshop. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Anil Chawla, the founder and president of Archive Social. Anil?
Well, Eric, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting us today to participate in this workshop. And of course, thank you all who have tuned in today on your busy Wednesday to learn more about this topic. And it really is a hot topic in terms of social media being a platform for communication and how government communicates out to its citizens, receives information, and so forth. We've had a lot of questions come up about, well, what does this mean in terms of record keeping? What does it mean to someone who has responsibilities of being a clerk or managing records within an organization? So we're excited today to partner with Municode to present information on this topic. Now, before I jump into my entire presentation, one thing that's very important to us is to understand our audience. And so before we get going here, what I'd like to do is actually kick us off with a poll. And so for all of you tuned in right now and GoToWebinar, you should see a poll appear on your screen. And we want to get a sense from all of you of which aspects of your agency's social media policy do you wish you felt more confident about? And you can select one or many of these options: public records laws, responding to records requests, having oversight. And we like to ask this question about policy because record keeping is, of course, a component of overall policy and really fits into an agency's overall approach. So appreciate all of you who are responding right now. We're going to give this just a moment. But as these responses come in, again, to set the stage for today's conversation, we want to start with this picture of social media as a critical channel of communication for your agency, and then talk specifically about how social media fits into the legal and policy channels, challenges that you may face, and then take that all the way to record keeping. Particularly for those of you who are clerks or assistant clerks fulfilling those responsibilities of record keeping in your organization, and give you that actionable guidance today in today's presentation on how to think about social media as a record and how it fits into your overall strategy. So with that, we have the majority of folks have responded to the poll. I actually want to go ahead and bring the results up so you all can see how you and your peers have responded. And it looks about more than 80% of you are looking for more confidence around social media as a public record and how it fits in the records laws, responding to records requests, very much related to that, and oversight. So all important topics, but public records really standing out as a key issue. So it's a good thing for us to know here, as I will take a good amount of time focusing on that issue in particular as we get going. So let's start by talking about government agencies and social media records, and just get to the crux of what this poll really brought out, the issues around both public records and records requests in general. A thesis that we want to present to you that we are seeing in the market today is that social media has risen to the level over the last several years of really being critical to how your agency operates. It is a core channel in terms of putting out information notices around emergencies, day-to-day events, policy issues, on and on and on. And so when we look at the landscape, what's become apparent, particularly from a record-keeping standpoint, from the standpoint of fulfilling the responsibilities of the clerk's office, is this notion that social media now is really an essential ingredient in terms of a response to a records request. And so what I want to talk about today is the factors that have created that environment. And again, it comes to one, the important ways in which your agency uses social media today, which is very different than, say, 6 or 7 years ago. Two, the fact that these forums are two-way forums with your citizens, and there's a level of moderation of content. In other words, edits, hiding, removing. Content gets changed on these platforms in a way that has exposed some issues, and we'll talk about those. And then 3, social media being a really open platform, again, having a lot of benefits, but because it is open, it also has some of those risks. And so user-generated content, while hopefully is mostly beneficial to you, getting that input from your audience, can be problematic. And in fact, we're all familiar with this phrase of things going viral, and social media is certainly where that happens. And so we've seen that the combination of these factors has led to an environment today where social media is really a first-class component of any records request situation or legal situation. So inevitably, your organization will need to produce records of social media. Now I'm going to deep dive into each of these, and what I want to start with is underscoring how mission critical social media has become for agencies of all types across the board. If you're law enforcement and your public safety, it's very obvious. So most law enforcement agencies are using social media to put information out about crimes, wanted suspects. Law enforcement agencies that do that are having significant success at receiving information from citizens because of soliciting those crime tips. Certainly in any kind of natural disaster or mass shooting, anything like that, it's abundantly clear that social media is mission critical. But even as you step outside of that, any agency on social media is using it as a platform as really the primary layer to communicate with citizens. If that's not where you are today, that's likely where you will be. We've seen that social media is perhaps the lowest friction, most productive way to disseminate information to your citizens and receive information back. And so it may be engaging them on topics in your region, your city. It may be on policy and politics. It may be local events. But essentially, social media has permeated everything that your government does. And rather than coming to your website just on their own accord or reading the paper newsletters, while those are still important, social media has become a prominent channel and oftentimes the #1 channel by which information gets out of citizens. And just by that very fact, it means that social media then gets pulled into all of the records requirements and the legal situations that you're used to seeing in terms of government communications. And now I want to give you one case study out of an agency that we work with coming out of Santa Barbara, California, just to underscore this fact. This is a situation from I believe about two and a half years ago, where the Santa Barbara Police Department had decided, the city of Santa Barbara actually had decided to put together a gun buyback program. And this is something that various municipalities across the country have engaged in. And it's also a controversial issue in terms of gun ownership and gun buyback. So when they posted information about this program, they put it out on a variety of channels, including social media. But the majority of communication really happened on social media, a lot of conversation back and forth, a lot of debate. And shortly after doing this, the National Rifle Association issued a records request for all communications related to the gun buyback. So again, in olden times, before social media, these are the types of programs that may have been run. The other communications would have still happened. You may have still received the records request, but now social media is in the mix, and the bulk of what happened was on Facebook. And so in this situation, it actually turned out that the city had just started archiving the content, and they were able to pull it. But they did this case study with us, talking about how it would have been nearly impossible to pull together all the communications across Facebook related to this records request, how it's likely they would have missed something. And so having a records management strategy on it was critical. They were able to respond to the records request. Again, fortunately, nothing came out of it. But it's kind of a normal thing to happen for different people to have different viewpoints, issue these records requests. They were able to move on and, in fact, run future programs. So just one example of how social media touches the types of programs and activities that your agency is used to engaging in, but now can be pulled into the mix. Now, the second category that I talked about in terms of creating this environment where records requests are inevitable for social media comes from the fact that this is a forum where content is posted by your agency, it's posted by your citizens, and it can be moderated. So, for example, your agency may post something, and it may be in a public safety situation where you're posting quickly, but it may be in a day-to-day event. Regardless, you may make a mistake and have to correct it. Citizens may be posting content to you. In fact, in some cases, they may be posting content that's profane, offensive, problematic, and you may want to remove it because you don't want your other citizens to see maybe a racial slur or something that's just really inappropriate. You may have citizens that are bothersome, that keep raising the same complaints. I'm sure many of you on the phone are thinking about someone that you may know in your region that's quite a vocal citizen. Well, on social media, if they cross the line over and over again, you may choose to block them. And there's all sorts of other issues in terms of public officials where there can be political topics, there could be controversy. And then ultimately remembering that it's not that you as an agency controls everything. On Facebook and Twitter, YouTube, you do not have control over all of these communications. You're able to post, but you will receive these comments, you will receive these messages. And whether or not you delete or hide or edit or modify anything, the citizens can do that to their own communications. And it leads to a landscape, an environment where the communications are changing, and they're changing out of your control. And it creates this, it can basically raise issues around, well, what was there, what was said, was it fair to remove that content? And one of the areas where we've seen a major concern come out is around First Amendment. So again, most of these issues are where a citizen may post something and then is complaining that a public official or a city has removed something, has violated their First Amendment. But again, the fact that the citizens can change things on their own just creates a lot of confusion here. But this topic of First Amendment comes up quite a bit. You've probably seen it in the news. And it's something that obviously that citizens are very sensitive to, is the ability for a citizen to communicate to you as a government and feel like their voice is being heard and that they're not unfairly being silenced. So it's led to quite a few news stories and real incidents across the years. And this is something that you've probably seen recently, at least particularly in the last year or so, but it's actually not new. Since the onset of social media, there have been challenges around the fact that citizens can contribute to these forums, but that then the content can get moderated, changed, removed. And so going all the way back to 2014 with the San Diego Sheriff's Department, in that situation, a sheriff removed some comments from a citizen, and ultimately led to the Sheriff's Department shutting down their Facebook page. And so when you think about that and how important social media, that's really not the outcome you want. But it's an instance where an agency thought that they could moderate that content at will, and it led to a problem. And so we've seen this happen over the years. Indiana had an interesting case in 2016 where the ACLU got involved. Again, similar situation where the agency was removing content from a citizen. Citizens felt like their First Amendment was being violated. ACLU also got involved in this case in New Jersey with the animal shelter Facebook page. And so a really big deal, especially with these large interest groups like the ACLU getting involved. And this continues on and on. And so one of the things that we want to make sure in this presentation while we're talking about records is to keep everyone informed about what are good practices in this space. And as an agency, you do have the right to moderate content, but you have to be very clear in your policy what that rule system and what that policy is. You have to be clear that you're not going to moderate content based on opinion, but again, profanity, racial slurs, hateful language. Those are the kinds of that's the kind of language that could cross the line. And so we see in the space that there's still confusion about this. This last news article is about a sheriff's department warning against negativity. This is bad news to do this kind of stuff. You don't want to cross the line around First Amendment. But because social media creates this forum for this two-way dialogue, First Amendment comes up a lot. You want to have that policy clear. You also want to think about the records implications and make sure you're covered. And certainly this is where we're seeing a lot of records requests come out. Is when these debates or lawsuits come up and someone says, I was unfairly censored. Well, now you need to be able to tell your side of the story and produce the records. And I mentioned this comes up in the news quite a bit. Certainly a lot of this happens with public officials, whether that's a governor or a sheriff. Prominent individuals will obviously draw attention. There's obviously folks that disagree, and it will make their voice heard. So the general rules apply across the board for agencies and public officials alike. But particularly encourage folks to be sensitive around how content's removed. And have awareness to the fact that moderation can lead to records requests when it comes to public officials, because that's where we're seeing most of the legal challenges in news articles. And one example of that is where actually there's a crossover between the agency and the public official. It comes out of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. This is just from August of 2017. This is a situation where the mayor in Chambersburg had decided to remove some content from the mayor's Facebook page. And an individual issued a records request. Again, this all kind of stems from First Amendment type concerns, concerns around moderation. But they issued a records request, and they issued the records request to the city. And the city originally attempted to decline the records request, saying that, well, the mayor's the mayor. The mayor has his own Facebook page, and we didn't set up this page. We don't run this page. This is not a records request we need to fulfill. And this actually went to the Pennsylvania Open Records Office, and the records office ruled that no, the city has to help fulfill this records request because the mayor, while this is a public official, they're not just off on their own and able to avoid public records requirements and records requests and all these kinds of things. That the mayor is actually conducting public business on this Facebook page, and it's public business, and therefore the city is responsible for assisting with this. And in fact, the city had actually linked to the mayor's page and shown some relationship to it. And so because the public business was being discussed on this page, that page then was generating public record, and the fact that content was being removed kind of led to the situation where the records request had happened, and they were responsible for fulfilling it. So it ties it all together in terms of the concern about content being removed, raising the records request, but it comes back to record keeping and the fact that these official communications, whether they're your agency's communications or your public officials' communications, need to fulfill the requirements, and you need to be able to produce these records. In the last case, the last situation I want to talk to was around user-generated content and going viral. So not only are there concerns around the fact that content can be removed and it could lead to First Amendment type concerns, but just in general, the fact that your citizens can post openly, whether they post directly to your page or they comment back or they message back or tweet back, they participate in the conversation. That's really the point of social media. And again, that's mostly a positive thing, but you can't control their content. And in some cases, it can lead your agency to being in a situation where you do have to respond to records requests because of something that a citizen or a user did. So to give you a really clear example of that, this is a case study from one of the agencies we work with, City of South Daytona, Florida. And this is what's interesting about this situation is that South Daytona is a small town. They're under 12,000 people, very modest social media presence, just a few comments a week type thing. But they had because of this viral issue, dealt with a records request. And so here's what happened. Essentially, a citizen posted this photo on her private Facebook page. And I'm just going to keep it up here for just a moment and be sensitive for folks. I know this is not an easy picture to look at. She posted this on our private Facebook page. And her friends, being good people, really called her out on it, began to share it across social media. And so this went viral of how could this person basically do this to a dog? Now, again, this was on a person's private Facebook page, nothing to do with the city at the time. However, because this person in their private Facebook profile had South Daytona as their location, the post went viral, and people ultimately came to the city's Facebook page in South Daytona to ask about this. And they said, how could you let this happen? What are you doing about this animal cruelty? And there was outrage. In fact, the city received over 24,000 comments. Just digest that for a moment. 24,000 comments when you're used to getting just a few a week. Now, the city, to their credit, used social media. This again speaks to the power and value of social media to reply back and say, we don't know what this is about, but we're going to look into it. And they began to provide regular, transparent updates. Ultimately, they tracked this person down, working with law enforcement across the country. And the kicker was that this person, while they had South Daytona in her profile, didn't actually even live in the city. She just had an outdated Facebook profile. So this viral event that started off by a person's private page became this massive records request for a town, really not caused by anything that they did. And there was national media, local media making records requests for those comments. And again, a very difficult situation, but because they had a records management strategy in place, archiving in place, able to produce those records and move on. They would have never certainly anticipated such a records request before that. So again, those are the cases when I talk about environmental factors that in terms of how government's using social media, those are the key ingredients that we're seeing lead to really the inevitable need for your agency to produce social media records. Now, one thing I want to call out from that is, what does that records request look like? Well, it may be a public records request. It may be a legal e-discovery request, but oftentimes what we also see from our customers is that it's more of an internal request. We have customers in situations such as the hurricanes that occurred last fall, where town council wanted a review of all the postings across social media. So not a legal circumstance, but still something very important. We have situations where customers foresee a potential legal circumstance, and so they have an internal records request where they want to collect all the information off their social media. So a lot of different ways in which that records request manifests, but certainly we're seeing that being generated out of these main driving factors. So I presented a bit of information there in regards to what's leading to the need to produce records. I want to take another poll here briefly to get feedback from you all before I continue. So pay attention to your GoToWebinar console. And the question to you is, how would you respond to respond to a request to produce records from your social media site if you got one today? So we'll give everybody a moment just to fill this out, and we'll take a look at the results. Okay, I'll give this just a few more seconds here. I'll give a good majority. So if you haven't put your response in, here's your last chance to do so. And in just a few seconds, I'll close the poll. We'll take a look at the results. Okay, great. I think we have a majority of responses. And let's take a look at the results. And wow, okay, so this is really interesting. So first of all, kudos to 1 out of 5 of you has some kind of archive in place, and then another 1 out of 5 almost 1 out of 4 doing something to manually archive. So almost half of you, or about 43%, in a position to archive in some way, have records. That's really great that you're taking some kind of action. I do applaud you for taking action to keep these records in some form or fashion. About 18% of you relying on the networks, and then the rest of the folks saying we don't have a plan. So again, hopefully something here for everybody. Appreciate the response to these polls. We are also, as promised, I'm going to come back to that public records issue, but we'll talk here in the end towards manual archiving and relying on the networks. For those of you who are doing that right now, and I certainly want anyone who doesn't have a plan today to leave today with some kind of action item to ensure that you have a plan for record keeping around your social media, given the fact that these records requests are inevitable in some form or fashion. So let's go right into that public records issue that came out of the original poll. And hopefully you can see the slide now on my screen about the Public Records Act. And I know this is a big issue in regards to that first poll that we ran of the implication of social media as a public record and how it fits in the public records laws. And so what I've brought on the screen is an example from the state of California, the California Public Records Act. What I'm going to talk to you here is not unique to California. In fact, as we all know, every state has a public records law. They all come out of the federal FOIA law from the 1970s. And they really, by essence and by spirit, are really designed to say the same thing. So I'll use California as an example. But one phrase you'll see in California's law that you'll see in most records laws is this phrase, regardless of physical form. So essentially, any writing, communication that's sent, received, transmitted to a public agency in regards to the business of the agency, regardless of physical form, constitutes public record. And I want to point this out because this is an area where folks will ask sometimes, well, is there a new law that says social media is record? This is a question that we would often get 4 or 5 years ago. I think more and more folks are kind of coming to this. The guidance has come out, and that I'll show you here in a minute. But the reason why there never had to be a new law for social media, and there likely won't be new laws in states saying social media is a record, is that the existing records law is written this way. It already covers social media, regardless of physical form. So in other words, a citizen complaint, whether you see that citizen complaint on a piece of paper in an email or a Twitter direct message, is a citizen complaint, regardless of that physical form. And so because these laws were written this way decades ago, as email has come out, as text messaging, social media has come out, the law is already there to say that this is public record. Now, what I was hinting at just a moment ago is that we would get this question a lot more 4 or 5 years ago of like, well, is there some kind of legal new law essentially saying that social media is record, and sort of that it didn't need to be. But most states have taken a proactive approach on this now, and they put out some clear guidance. So in your state, and we'll look at this in a second, there's likely guidance today that really clarifies that social media is public record and what you need to do about it. So an example from California is in 2015, the Records Information Management Office put out this e-records guidebook where they talk about how social media communications, both what you say and what your citizens say to you, generate public records. And then explicitly in here that you need to have a plan to export records from the social media site. You cannot rely on these social networking sites. You need to have a plan to export records. So we've seen this guidance come out that not only says, yes, this is public record, but it also provides important clarification on what agencies need to do, in this case in California, get the records out of the social networking site into your own control. So if you're wondering, well, what has my state said if you're not in California? We at Archive Social do as much as we can to be a resource on this topic. This is the world that we live and breathe in. And so we've built a map of the United States, and for every state consolidated the latest guidance that's available from the state. It starts with the public records law in the state, but it includes the latest guidance like that CalREM guidance you've seen. And so if you go to this bit.ly/SM public records, click on your state, you'll see that latest guidance from your state on this issue of social media as a record, and have again, the latest and greatest of what your state is advising you to do. What we're seeing across the country is essentially commonality across the country in terms of how to approach social media as a record. But good to see the state-by-state guidance. So when it comes to that public records issue, in that first poll question, I hope that's given folks on the line enough to have clear understanding that social media will generate public records. Now, not everything that is said on social media is a public record, but certainly within what you say and what your citizens say to you, records will be generated. One thing to highlight then is, well, when do the records requests come out? I talked earlier about the different kind of environmental factors that have led to the records requests. But if you're wondering if your agency hasn't seen a social media records request yet, if you're wondering, well, has this really happened? We have significant examples now. 4 or 5 years ago, frankly, we hadn't really seen a very specific request for social media as a public record in terms of someone asking for Facebook or Twitter content. We do now see that all the time where records requests come in asking specifically for Facebook, Twitter, or social media content. We've published a number of case studies on this. But while this is increasing, we recognize that most agencies still have probably not seen that records request that explicitly asks for the platform. What you probably have seen, though, are records requests that include social media. So I want to really highlight this at the bottom of this slide. If you're seeing records requests like all notifications of the street closure, and you're using social media, it's very likely you use social media during an emergency circumstance, a weather circumstance, messaged about street closures, maybe answered a citizen's question who may have asked about it. And then if you receive a records request, all notifications of street closure that doesn't explicitly say social media, it really does include your social media. In fact, your social media may have some of the most important content. And certainly with public safety type circumstances, we find most often that social media has the meat of the matter in terms of the communication sent out by your agency. So please keep that in mind. Again, if someone's not explicitly saying Facebook or Twitter, they may be really asking for it. We are seeing certainly more awareness by journalists and citizens to actually ask for Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, other platforms in that records request. And to paint that picture very clearly, this is a pretty recent case from California. It's April of last year. What happened there is a woman actually issued a records request to the city of San Mateo related to the police department's Twitter activity direct messages. And the police department, it turns out, the police department's Twitter account had been hacked, and all the direct messages had been deleted. And so in this records request, we started with her asking for this content. She found that out and actually then turned it into a lawsuit that was entirely focused on the fact that the city of San Mateo did not have in their policy records management of social media. So again, kind of a meta example in the sense that she was raising a lawsuit at that point to point out that they weren't addressing this issue, really to create that awareness. And so you can see this case and how it was settled. But it brought to light a number of things, including the fact that citizens have become more aware that social media is a record, to the extent that this person's issuing a lawsuit for a city not handling social media as public record. But two, the genesis of her request came from the fact that the content in Twitter was lost because the Twitter account had been hacked, the direct messages had been deleted. And so this goes to the point of you can't rely on the social networks for your record keeping. And so this is a very clear example. If you're in California, this is probably extreme relevance to you, but it's really for anyone. This is not anything specific to California. Your state has these requirements. This exact situation can happen with content being lost off of your social media sites, and or a citizen recognizing that your agency has yet to treat social media as a record. So this is driving quite a bit of awareness. We wanted to put this in front of all you today. Now, the issue then is if you aren't managing social media as a record, it is very, very challenging then to respond to a records request. As you saw in that San Mateo case, without having some record keeping or archiving in place, those direct messages are lost. Agencies today who aren't doing something around records management are not in compliance with public records law, will not be able to fully comply, right? You may be able to get some of your content off social networking sites, but it's not a confident position to be in terms of compliance with records laws. And I'll give you some more data here in a minute on how much confidence you really can have in terms of your data being on social networks. And that goes to that second bullet point of data being lost. And finally, as I showed a couple slides ago, because social media has really permeated everything you do as an agency, it's so important to how you operate and how you communicate to your citizens that it's likely that the records requests you're receiving today in some form should include social media. And so to really correctly respond to those records requests, you need to factor in your social media. And I want to underscore that this is something that's gotten a lot of awareness now because of what's happened in politics and really the presidential level. We all know that our current president is a very active social media user. Our previous president was the first president to use social media, used it quite a bit to communicate with the public. And so one of the factors that's driving a lot of awareness to folks of social media being an important government communication, it's driving awareness of the fact that social media is a public record, is what's happening at the political level, at the presidential level. And so when these news articles come out in major magazines and news publications about the president needing to be archived, that then trickles down to the state level, the local level, and it creates a lot more awareness for your citizens, your journalists, that, hey, social media is record. And so one of the things that we've seen as a result of this is agencies are seeing more records requests. So this is not a bad thing, but I want to draw out awareness to the fact that the high profile use of social media in government then draws attention to the policies and requirements at the local level. So again, this is the right time. If you haven't addressed it, right now is the time to address these records management challenges. So why is this challenging? Let's close this out. And of course, as Robert mentioned in the beginning, we're here to take your questions. So I've covered a lot of material thus far, probably raised a lot of questions. So please do get those in the GoToWebinar console. We will circle back to answer as many as we can. But I want to close out with, I'm encouraging you to think about your social media as a channel that will certainly generate records requests. I've laid out why you can't, the compliance challenge, the public records challenge, the fact that the records requests are happening in a variety of different ways, that you need to have this records management strategy in place. So now let's look at the challenge of actually implementing such a strategy. And what I'd like to do here is illustrate an example of social media. And this is an example we've put together just to draw out the reality of how social media works. So for those of you who are maybe involved with records, not as much involved with your social media, this will be a bit eye-opening, I think, in terms of this records management challenge. Most content types are a lot simpler. An email comes in to your system and it's just there. And your records management challenge for emails to hold on to it. Social media is significantly different. So let's take this example of a city posting about vandalism in a park. I'm using Instagram while Facebook and Twitter get talked about a lot. Let's keep in mind that your communications teams are using a variety of social networking channels to communicate with citizens. So we use Instagram. And imagine this post comes in, or the city puts out a post about vandalism, and a comment comes in pretty soon that's not meaningful from a record standpoint. And this post just sits out there on Instagram. Now, let's say 6 months go by. What can happen on social media at any time if someone can comment back? Now imagine that a citizen comments back saying, hey, this happened again. And it mentions another person's profile. And it actually starts a conversation where this other person gets back and says, hey, wait, listen, you're calling me out. I wasn't involved with this. Don't watch the false accusations. And so you can imagine this conversation is happening without the city's involvement, but this is how social media works. And then as this conversation happens, maybe the citizens decide to edit. So the first user decides to change their post and no longer mention that citizen. And then the second citizen who was being called out earlier sees that that Trailblazer edited his comment, decides to delete and say, you know what, I don't want I didn't want my name on this in the first place. You've removed it. I'm gonna go ahead and remove my comment. So you can see in this example, and this is kind of put together, but how you could put something out, but social media can have your citizens participating, commenting, providing information of value, editing, deleting, and this dynamic environment of social media is how it works day in and day out. This content being posted and changing, really out of your control. So this raises a number of different records management challenges. How would you have, without some kind of records management strategy with archiving in place, how would you have kept up these? How would you have captured these records? If you were to go back to this today, you might just see what's left, which is the last comment, not the original comment that was edited. You won't see the comment that was posted and deleted, right? You may not even know this even happened because it happened 6 months after original post if you're doing manual record keeping. So this is really where social media gets interesting because such an open forum is so dynamic. So a lot of challenges here. What I want to focus on right now, though, is coming back on this. If you were to go back to this Instagram post today, it won't have the records of what happened because, again, the edit, the delete, not there. And so we at Archive Social actually ran a study to see how this works in reality. In July of this year, we chose 500 of our government customers that are active on social media, and we surveyed their use of social media for 1 month. And our technology is able to detect when content's deleted. And we really want to get to the answer of how much can you really rely on the social network for your record keeping. In this 1 month, these 500 customers, we knew that they all had at least one deletion. It turned out they had an aggregate of over 200,000 deletions. So over 400 deletions per customer per month. That's more than 10 records deleted a day. Now, not everything on social media is an important record, but certainly in there are important records. And really eye-opening fact here is that this volume of deletions is so much higher than what most agencies will think was deleted from their site. So if you were to talk to these customers, they'll tell you that maybe they deleted one thing here or there, or more often than not, customers will tell us they never delete. What actually happens, though, is that citizens can contribute and then edit and delete. And this happens quite a lot, quite more than many of us expected. And so again, in this one survey, we were able to show how much content gets lost off the social network. Again, it could be crime tips, could be citizen complaints. It could be a question the citizen asked that was relevant to how you responded to something in a thread. And because they can delete their social networking profiles, this information will disappear off the network and you won't even know. And so you'll essentially be in a position where you're unable to fulfill records requests or unable to comply with public records requirements, and you won't even know it because the networks really aren't built for social media compliance for FOIA requirements. So we did this study on 500 customers. I should also say that we wanted to make sure, we're very cognizant of what's really happening here. And when we stepped out of these 500 customers, 95.4% of our entire customer base had a deletion. So this deletion problem is a real problem and it affects practically everybody. So putting all these things together, talked about social media being dynamic, it's happening in real time, this information is out of your control, you cannot rely on the networks. Even if the content's on the network, by the way, if you've ever tried to search something from 6 months ago, particularly across multiple sites, multiple face pages, it's nearly impossible. And then there's also other issues in regards to records management that some of you may be aware of, things like technical metadata, which you're not going to get from screenshots. You're not going to get that from Facebook. So there's a whole host of problems right now if your strategy is to rely on the social network, or perhaps even just take kind of screenshots when you need them. So I want to bring that to your awareness and have you all thinking about records management in a much more proactive fashion. The issue about the networks is really the core issue that we see with most agencies, and we have seen states like in Arizona, you can see this quote, really come out and say that these networks do not have records management capabilities. You saw that the California guidance as well earlier, that you must have a plan to export. So this is not only me saying it, but your state, and you can go look at the guidance, is likely already telling you that you need to get this data in your control. And remember, again, this content can get edited, deleted, hidden at any time. The networks have zero obligation, no obligation to produce records for you. Facebook actually has a disclaimer on their site that says, you can subpoena us, but you must do so before content's deleted. And then networks in themselves just they have downtime. They have really no guarantees to you, so you got to keep that in mind. I also, on the back of that, want to point out that I think it's a great thing if you have no record, if you have no archiving, no records management system in place today, that at a minimum you take screenshots. But please keep in mind that this is a stopgap approach. Some record better than no record. But screenshots really will not position your agency well for producing records in response to records requests. At a bare minimum, you're not aware of everything that your citizens are posting and deleting, and it's really impossible for you to screenshot all of that at all times. But even for what you are able to capture, being able to search that over time and produce it is a difficult challenge. Screenshots do not have metadata. They're easily disputed because anyone can Photoshop anything. So since some record better than no record, but not a long-term strategy if that's the boat you're in today. And certainly if you are taking screenshots, you know how time-consuming and challenging it is to maintain those records. So what do you want to look for? You want to look for a records management strategy that allows you to get control of this data as immediately as possible. You want high frequency of capture. Again, unlike email, unlike other content types, this data doesn't just come into your hands. You have to go out there and get it, and you have to get it quickly. You have to be as comprehensive as possible. Keep in mind that social networks are very detailed and very complex. We have live video streams now. We have nested comment threads, conversation threads. We have multimedia where you can post multiple photos, emojis, all these kinds of things. And you want to make sure you have as complete a record as possible. For this kind of record keeping, it does come down to records requests and potential legal situations. So you want to be able to stand by these records in court. You want to make sure they're authentic. Again, a screenshot on its own is not provable as authentic. So you want a records management strategy here that allows you to have records that are authentic, that will hold up in court as evidence if needed. And then last but not least, but responding to a records request on social media, oftentimes we'll see records requests that are topical. And so it may be, for example, one of our customers received a records request for 14 different keywords related to oiling, drilling, fracking. And so that touches hundreds upon hundreds of records across dozens upon dozens of social media conversations across multiple sites. And so when you produce that kind of records request, it's not enough to just produce the individual comment that touched that keyword. You need to produce the context of it because you need to understand what conversation that happened on. You need to understand the other comments. You really need to have that full view of what was being said. And so whatever records management strategy you have in place, archiving system, needs to be able to produce your social media in a way that you can make sense. You can replay that conversation. You can replay that timeline. And so ultimately what this comes down to, just like you archive your email, you archive other types of content, social media archiving is a critical piece of infrastructure technology that is necessary for an organization to have the kind of record keeping you need. If you do look at social media archiving, you're going to want to look for a solution that can archive in real time or near real time within seconds or minutes to get that frequency. You want those authentic legal records of social media. You want technology that will ensure those records can be used in a legal circumstance. You want to be able to replay and reconstruct those conversations. And you want look for technology that's going to overcome these challenges of the social network. Again, Facebook and Twitter and these sites are not built for archiving. So whatever archiving technology you look at, it needs to really overcome the limitations and challenges of the social network to keep you as compliant as possible. So that's my spiel on records management. I hope you found it informative, gives you direction on addressing this issue in terms of social media being a record. One thing that we do want to offer at Archive Social, outside of our commercial offering, we do have this capability on our homepage at archivesocial.com. You can also go to this bit.ly to actually create a sample your own archive. The idea here is we want to show folks that you can address archiving in an actually a very simple fashion. It's actually very easy to do, and give folks the ability to look at your own archive to see what does it look like to have your content, track it for a few weeks to see how is content get edited. You can actually see after a few weeks how much got deleted off your social media. So again, we call this sample your archive, preview your archive capability, where you can just see what it's like to have an archive and be able to look at how your social media changes over time. So check that out at no cost whatsoever. It takes about literally 60 seconds. We actually have a counter on the screen where you connect your first Twitter account, and in 60 seconds we'll build an archive, and you'll get to see how your content evolves and gets deleted over time. So with that, I'm actually going to hang back to Robert on my end, and we'll take a look at questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Anil. Thanks for that. So let me reiterate what Anil mentioned a second ago. Please enter your questions in the question window, and we'll take time now to answer some of them. And so, Anil, let me feed you the first question here from Robin. Can you turn off public comments on your post and still be in compliance?
That's a great question, Robin, in terms of can you turn off comments? It actually turns out that years ago, and I can't remember exactly which year this was, something like 2011, that you actually had an option to turn off comments on Facebook. And that option is gone. In most social networking sites, you cannot turn off the two-way conversation. On Facebook, you can stop people from putting brand new posts, top-level posts on your page, basically stop them from starting new topics. But the moment you post anything, they can comment back. Now, we are aware that some agencies have tried to use some of Facebook's Facebook has some moderation capabilities where it can flag keywords to try to prevent comments from showing up. This is not a recommended practice from our end. In fact, we have an agency, we have a case study we published where lawyers had advised the agency to basically hide all comments, just don't let them show up. And a citizen, this is in Vineland, New Jersey, a citizen realized that every time the citizen's friends posted, the comments were disappearing, and actually went to the police department and said, I think you're hiding something. I'm going to issue a public records request once a month, every month until you stop this. And so the citizen actually did that until the Vineland came to us with help on how they could produce these records over and over again. And so I just want to highlight that not only is it technically not possible to completely turn it off, it's probably not a good idea to even try. You're going to create the social media exists for this transparency, this two-way conversation. And when we've seen agencies try to turn it off, it actually creates issues. It creates concerns about censorship. It creates issues around First Amendment. So it's not a practice I would recommend.
Okay, great. Another question. Can you archive Facebook Live? What's involved with archiving video?
Yes, that's a good question. Your Facebook Live is a live stream video. You start recording and you keep recording until you're done, but it's already on Facebook and it's showing as you record it. Twitter Periscope is very similar. And I'm glad you asked this because when it comes to archiving social media, there's all sorts of technical challenges in our world. The idea of archiving a video that keeps going and going was a technical challenge. So that's something that we at Archive Social can do. We do capture Facebook Live, we do capture Twitter Periscope as well, and we capture all the comments that are coming in on those videos as they're happening.
Okay, great. Another question from Allison. Are there any examples of lawsuits where Archive Social's records for a client, quote unquote, save them?
Yes, absolutely. And one thing I'd highlight here, Allison, is that oftentimes when Archive Social has been used to produce records for a client, it's part of a bigger circumstance. But we have numerous case studies now where Archive Social has been used to produce records, whether for a legal circumstance or for a public record circumstance. I'll give you one example. coming out of the city of Spokane, Washington. Again, the situation is bigger than just social media records, but not having the archiving would have been a real problem. In this circumstance, essentially what happened in the city of Spokane, we had this case study published with Government Technology, is that the city was involved with promoting this annual kayaking trip. And unfortunately, during one of the trips, a individual fell off the kayak and died. And so the plaintiff, the lawyers, the plaintiff's family, actually issued a discovery request for all the communications related to this kayaking trip. Their case was around, whether or not this trip should have happened and the safety warnings. And so because the city was involved with communicating this, part of that e-discovery request was for 2 years of postings from Facebook related to the kayaking trip. And so we have this case study where the communications director talks about how without archiving, they may not have been, they wouldn't have been able to respond to that records request within Washington's required time frame, and may not have been able to respond to it at all. And so that's just one example. We have a number of others. I'd actually direct you to. I'd love to cover more of them. I know we're coming closer to time, but we have a number of them on our website at archivesocial.com under resources. But we've got several circumstances where our archive has been used, again, for responding to a records request, preventing it from becoming a legal situation, but also being used in actual legal situations.
Okay, great. And what I'll make sure to do is include a link to that resource section in the follow-up email. Okay, so we have another question from Lisa. Can you explain how what you can do is different from Facebook's archive function?
Absolutely. I've made the statement a few times here that you cannot rely on the social networks. Now, some of you may know that Facebook and Twitter provide features that are called download your data or archive, download your archive. If that's what you're referring to, the features that are built into the network to download the data are extremely limited. So if you go download your data off of Facebook, say for your government Facebook page, number one, when you download the data, it will only have what's still on Facebook. So again, the fact that this content can be deleted anytime by you or your citizens, and that happens, means that you're not going to have all your records. So what you're really getting is a snapshot of what's still there, but you've missed everything that was deleted. And again, a lot of times the records requests we see are related to deleted content, so it's not helpful in those circumstances. So one, you're missing anything that's been deleted. And then two, which is really surprising to folks, but you should try it on your own page, is that the download features are really scoped to your own public posts, do not include the third-party content from your citizens. So again, a lot of times in these records requests, particularly if you have citizens that are challenging you, it's the citizen commentary that's really important. And these download features do not give you any of that in that built-in download. They're trying to protect user privacy. So on Twitter, you won't get any of the private messaging, you won't get the mentions. On Facebook, you won't get the comments. So those download features are extremely limited. They're really misnomers in the way that they're labeled. And we have not, when I talk to agencies who have actually tried to use that, we've gotten significant feedback that those features are missing, not only missing the content, very hard to use. And of course, if the data can be deleted off the network, then it's just not going to be there. So you do have to have some other approach to archiving those records.
Okay, great. We have a question from Lori. What is the cost for the program?
Well, specifically in regards to Archive Social, we sell transparency. So we're very transparent with our pricing. It's on our website, archivesocial.com/pricing. The high level answer to that, Lori, is that we understand this is an issue where you have to be proactive. You may not have seen the records request yet. So we've actually designed our pricing to be under $5,000 annual for the majority of agencies. Under 90% of government agencies in the United States, under $5,000 annual. And the idea here is to try to make Archive Social a discretionary spend as much as possible. We do have price points below that. If your social media usage is more evolved and you have much more content, price points above that. But again, 90% of agencies under $5,000 annual. And the idea behind our pricing is to make it as easy as possible for you to get an archive in place. It's very simple. At that price point of $5,000 annual, unlimited social media accounts, all that kind of stuff. No fees, no hidden, other costs. Just a simple fixed cost to get you archiving, to get your pages covered and compliant.
Okay, great. I think that was the last question there. So I wanted to thank Anil for speaking, and again, we want to thank Municode for offering us this opportunity to present. We will be sending out a follow-up email in the next 24 to 48 hours. Again, we'll have a link to the recording and any of the resources that were mentioned. We'll probably put a link to the template social media policy, as well as a link to a general resources section with a number of the case studies and other guides that Anil mentioned. So thank you again for attending, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Cheers.